Hey guys, this is OMG Clado, and today we're going to be doing the top 0.56% episode 3. So today I'm going to talk about a few more general things, and these concepts will basically involve, like, for example, taking notes on regulars or fish, as well as, some multi-tabling tips. So the first thing I wanted to point out, which is kind of like a random tangent, but I just wanted to point this out, is recently on Skype, a few people have added me to talk about the 180-man turbos or coaching or whatever, and a lot of them have said something pretty similar, which is basically like, I've played 50 games or 100 games and I'm down X amount, or I'm on minus X ROI, and I just wanted to point out that the variance in these games once again is really, really big. So I just in general want to encourage you guys not to be discouraged when you do hit unfortunately bad or non-winning results, especially over a small sample, because honestly 50 games, 100 games, 200 games, or even like 1,000 games really isn't really a big sample. I mean, with 1,000 you can kind of get a pretty good idea in general of how you're doing, although obviously you can hit like really bad variance during this time, but again, it does give you a better idea in general when you do have 1,000, but even then it's not that big of a sample. But my point is, with even smaller than that, I really wouldn't be too worried about basically that you're losing or whatever. And whilst obviously you could be losing, even if you are winning, it's pretty likely that you will hit such a basically a downswing during such a small sample size. And at the same time, I'd still recommend obviously you guys to continue to work on your game and improve, because that's always going to be really important. But again, I would still play them, and especially when you're playing like fewer tables, like 1, 2, 3, 4, or even a little bit more maybe. It will take time for the sample size to get bigger, and that's no problem, because again, at the start we really just want to work on our games rather than our hourly and stuff like that. So again, yeah, just don't worry too much and don't get too discouraged. Apologies to those of you who don't actually have this problem, but I do feel that enough of you out there are having similar kind of results, and again, I just want to make sure to encourage you guys to continue to work on your game and play them at the same time. And I do want to also point out that obviously the lower your ROI or win rate is, and when I say lower, like, I mean it could be lower as in compared to like a top rig who has 25%. That's just an example, by the way, but let's say a top rig has 25%, maybe you have 20% or 15% or 10 or even 5%. And when you are working in the game and you're not yet already a crushing rig, in other words, most of the people who are watching these videos, that's extremely normal, obviously. And again, the goal of this series, as well as your, like, what I'm assuming many of your goals to be, is to just get a lot better and eventually crush yourself. But at the moment, for those of you who already are winning, your win rates aren't going to be as high, and therefore the variance is going to be bigger in the sense that your downswings will be more likely, and yeah, like going on a bigger downswing will be also more likely. So once again, I just want to again encourage you guys to continue playing and working on your game, because the variance is really big, and a small sample doesn't really mean too much. So yeah, I mean, I would be a bit more conservative if I had a smaller bankroll, just because you do want to like practice good bankroll management. So maybe, for example, I would work on my game like even more so than someone who was more comfortably rolled. And one other general thing is that whilst the variance can be pretty killer in these games, even for the top winning rigs, you can also really look forward to the upper side of variance, or the positive side of variance, which is basically your really, really big upswings, which will also happen. I mean, by the nature of these games, basically if you are like a standard rig and you're playing quite a lot of tables, in a typical session, very, very often you'll be up like 100 plus normal average buy-ins, sometimes even more, and at the same time, unfortunately, sometimes you will just go down 100 buy-ins or something. So typically the sessions are either plus heaps or minus a lot in general. Yeah, that was just again something that has come up quite a lot recently, and I just wanted to quickly talk about that, or at least mention it. The other thing is for multi-tabling, and I do realize that some of the stuff and maybe some of the future stuff in this particular episode is going to be somewhat remedial for the people who already are familiar with note-taking and yeah, like I guess multi-tabling in general. But I do think this is really important, and a lot of people have asked about effective ways to multi-table, or how I multi-table and stuff. So I will talk a little bit about it. Like for a start, I just want to say that if your computer isn't really good enough to play enough tables with Hold'em Manager running and stuff, I know it's not really I don't know, maybe not really a common issue, but I do realize that some of you out there, and including me, like if quite a few months ago actually, I guess basically if you're running like, say for example, even 15 tables, or especially like say 30, and you have Hold'em Manager running and Table Ninja, then it does kind of lag sometimes, and that can make timing out easier and stuff. So I do hope that it's not really an issue for most of you, but if it is, there's a few things you can do. The first thing is you can turn off the sound. The reason I have it off is just because I want to show you a few things on the table soon, but normally I it doesn't really matter for me. But yeah, you can turn off the sound, and that should help a bit in general. I think also turning off the animation here definitely help if you don't already have it off. And finally, you can also change the performance of your computer and the control panel. That's not really something I'm an expert on, so I can't really help you show you here, but you can turn off some of the graphics so that it does make things look a lot uglier, but it definitely does help with the performance of your computer, I believe, and it should reduce the lag a little bit. And you can also obviously turn it off when you're not playing poker, so you don't have to, put up with the tilting crap that it looks like. Other than that, I would suggest that you guys, let's see, what else would I change? There was some, oh right, okay, so the other thing is I would generally definitely recommend a 4-color deck for almost everyone. This, I know if you're not already using it, it's really weird and it looks really weird and it's really hard to get used to. But when this is basically the same. Before I first started using it, a friend told me about it, and he basically said this to me, and I can basically 100% agree with him. It's just, at first it's weird, and it does take some getting used to, but once you do use it and you're used to it, you really pretty much can't really go back. Like, you just get used to it and it's fine, and it does help. It definitely helps with multi-tabling in general, in the sense that it can maybe help you, like, sometimes not misclick. I mean, I'm not saying that you guys at the moment are seeing like 5 red cards and going, oh my god, I have a flush, but I mean, it can happen occasionally. And the second reason is basically just because if you're playing like, a lot of tables, it does sort of, or in my opinion, definitely does help you identify, what suits you have quicker. Like, if you do have 2 red cards, I know you can obviously see one's diamond, one's heart or whatever, but it does help you identify quicker if your hand is suited or offsuit, for example, or whatever. So once again, I would definitely recommend this. Secondly, I would generally recommend changing your theme. There's not like one specific theme you have to use, but I would say, like, for instance, Hyper Simple is one of the more commonly used ones that I also use, and I would recommend. Of course, there's other ones, but I think, yeah, the less distracting, the better, I think. And also, just removing the pictures of the cards and just making it like a plain deck. Like, I'm gonna sit down at a few tables because I want to show you guys a few other things as well, but yeah, it'll come up soon if you don't know what I mean. So yeah, just if the cards are like that, it takes some getting used to, but it definitely helps. It definitely helps, and it will, for those of you who are looking to multi-table, again, eventually once you're playing more tables, definitely help. So other than that, what else do we want to talk about? Okay, so if you want to consider like tiling, cascading, or stacking, there's obviously like a few options out there. In general, I don't really, basically, I definitely stack everything on top of each other. So I literally just go like this, all 30 tables or whatever number of tables I'm playing on top of each other, almost always. Sometimes I will do some tiling or something, especially towards the end of the session, but usually I do this. Obviously, if you have multiple monitors and stuff like that, it's obviously an option to tile, but the reason I prefer to stack a lot, basically by far, is just because of the simple fact that, firstly, you don't really have to like move your head and neck. And whilst that might sound weird, like when you're playing 30 tables or something, honestly, in a session, in any particular session, it does actually account to a lot of head moving. Like if you're playing 20 tables or even more, just the simple fact that you're moving your head and neck to see other tables is pretty significant, and we're just gonna jam. But yeah, it does matter, and I mean, again, it's not a big deal, but that's one of the factors. And secondly, just the simple fact that you don't have to move your mouse as much. Like if you're playing, if you're playing like multiple tables or whatever, then once again, I do think that it definitely helps if you can just move. Basically, you can keep your mouse almost exclusively in here, like fold, call, raise, or whatever. And again, that is a pretty significant factor in general. And yeah, so you can see the cards here. Like I mean, I can't remember what's the name for them, playing cards or something. Plain, like not playing, but plain cards. Again, it does help you see what the hands are quicker, in my opinion, especially if you're multi-tabling. So that's just the thing I was talking about. So yeah, and again, if the fact that you can just basically go fold, raise, fold, call, raise, etc., definitely helps. Secondly, I would definitely recommend putting some hotkeys down. So what I mean by that is you can go to like options, bet slide options, and you can put these buttons here. Like, I think they're definitely very helpful. There's obviously common default ones such as 3 times the big blind, which you're obviously going to do very often. At the same time, you can also put maximum. That's really important because obviously you're going to be shoving all the time, and the fact that you can just click max and then go shove is going to help you a lot. In general, it's going to save a little bit of time. Even better is if you set up Table Ninja hotkeys, but we're going to talk about that shortly. and also post flop you can make it X percentage of the pot. Once again, you can change these. I often do, like for example if I'm playing cash, I usually prefer to make them a different size. Like I can't remember exactly how much, but I mean this is just like what I have at the moment. I'm not sure what I would have it as, but yeah, definitely once again I would definitely have max as one of them. And as you can see, like, well, I'm not in hand right now, but I'll show you again. You can like max for all, and it's definitely very good for the 180s. I would say it's probably essential for every form of poker, except for limit games, I guess. And yeah, post flop, once again, 2 different pot sizes and 2 different percentages of the pot and max. Again, also advanced multi-table options. A few of these things you can change, but I would definitely turn off minimize main lobby when opening table. Actually, I guess if you're using Table Ninja, it doesn't really matter, but it does, like, if you do register and it minimizes the lobby every time, that's pretty annoying. Single click table activation, that basically just, it doesn't really matter if you're stacking, but it does mean if you're tiling, for example, if you have to click twice on the table otherwise. So if I have a table on the top left and the action's there, then I want to actually do something on the top right table, I have to click there twice instead of just once if I don't have this selected. So that's obviously, like, you know, quite important. So yeah, I mean, I just, you know, I click the max button and instant jam basically, and that again saves you some time. So that's basically what I would change. Also, auto close didn't go without notification. That basically just means if you do bust, it closes automatically. That's good because you don't have to click the buttons. And also, one of the other things that's not as, you know, commonly known is the simple fact that you don't, we won apparently versus ace-3, okay, so whatever. Yeah, it's also the fact that you simply don't have to see, like, if you got like a bad beat or whatever. And I think that for multi-tabling, for most people it definitely helps in general, especially the ones who are kind of more prone to tilting or feeling bad about getting sucked out or whatever. If you do simply stack all your tables and then just call shoves and stuff like that, and once you bust, it just closes. You don't see what happened. I think it helps with in general. It's not really a big deal, but it does help. So again, you can click max and shove. I'm not going to do it now, but you know, you can, you know, do click these buttons and it'll automatically come up here. Obviously, like, because this is 1 cent, 2 cent, I can't go 2.25, but you get the idea. Table Ninja at the moment, I actually don't have hotkeys set, which is, you know, pretty bad. I should, but this stuff you can see on the web. If you download it, you can see on the website. The explanations are pretty good, and of course, sit and go opener. As well as general, like, you can put some of these things, like make sure you don't time out and stuff like that. It's all pretty important. I don't know exactly where everything is right now, but you know, again, all the explanations are on the website. And once again, I would definitely recommend Table Ninja for multi-tabling. Sorry. Once again, like, this is something that helps you automatically open stuff. So if you're multi-tabling, you don't have to click register, okay, register, okay, register, okay, and you don't have to, like, look in the lobby and see, oh, okay, now another game is loaded, I'm gonna, you know, open it. And it also closes the lobbies for you, which is kind of good, I think. Like, if you not for cash, but you know, for lobbies, it closes and it makes sure you don't have, like, you know, like 50 different things here. And once again, yeah, you can make it so that it automatically registers in anything specifically. So you can make it, oopsie, sorry. You can automatically make it so that it registers every 180 or every 180 up to $15 or every, you know, every whatever basically. And you can make it so that it it leaves the maximum number of tables as 10, 5, depending on how many you play, or, you know, unlimited, and for how long and so on. And obviously you can stop it at any time. So again, I would recommend Table Ninja. So that's pretty much like the basics of that. One other thing I'm just going to say in general is that I really encourage you guys to ask any questions at all, or even recommend me things that you guys want me to talk about in future videos. I do have, you know, general things that I do have planned, including a hand history review with a Deuces Crack member pretty soon. But other than that, you know, this series is as much my series as it is your guys' series. And if you have any questions or any specific concepts that you guys want to be that you guys want to hear discussed that I haven't already done, feel free to either post, like, in the thread of this video, or just PM me or add me on message me on Skype. And once again, I'd be happy to take any considerations, and most likely, unless you say something absurd, you know, I'm pretty much happy to, you know, talk about it, and it would be pretty good. Like, not only will you be helping yourself, but other members too. I'm sure, like, if you want to see it talked about, then I'm sure other people will too. So I would definitely encourage you guys to do that. So other than that, I think I've talked about most of those basic things. Now I'm just going to talk about note-taking. Now, this is something that's pretty important in general. I wish I could fold, but I have, like, when it offers me to check or fold, it automatically checks anyway. I think this is something that most people don't do enough in general, and what I want to talk about is, actually, firstly, like, if you're facing a decision in any particular spot, like whether to call a shove, whether to isolate, whether to jam into the big blind, if you're blind versus blind or whatever. There's two things that I would recommend you guys to do to basically find out, if you don't already know, if the guy is a regular or more likely to be a regular, or more likely to be recreational, or yeah. So the first thing I would do is I would look at if he's showing a VIP status. This usually isn't always necessarily like a towel, and especially during like this month where it's like VIP bonus month or whatever, it's not really going to be as useful because it's much easier to get silver, gold, platinum, star. So again, this week maybe not so much, but let's say in a typical in any particular given time, let's say we have player that we're looking at, if they've got usually like Supernova or Supernova Elite, which is kind of rare at these games, is usually not so common, but especially like Supernova is it's pretty much almost always a rig. Like obviously it's not necessarily a good rig, but at least he's a rig and or she, and therefore it's more likely to be someone who's going to be calling you a bit wider, or subsequently pushing wider in general. Again, with specific reads, you can probably, deduce if that guy is more likely to be playing a bit tight or loose and stuff, because once again, a rig may be a rig, but a rig can still be bad, or like basically bad if the ranges. So I would, take that into account too. But simply put, Supernova is usually almost always a rig, and also same thing with Platinum Star really. Gold is kind of in the middle, but Platinum is usually almost always a rig as well, especially at the 180s, because comparatively to other games, it's kind of harder to get Platinum Star if you're playing 180s. I know you definitely can, obviously, but you do have to put in more days or volume or whatever in general. So just because like the rake isn't so high, and the highest rake games are the 35s, which a lot of people don't play and they don't run very often. So basically, you're kind of playing like $1-ish raked games and stuff. So that's, I guess, the reason. And again, gold is kind of borderline, but basically if they're bronze star, like showing bronze or silver star, they're almost always like a fish or recreational player. Like I know some people do that like as a joke or just to deceive or whatever, but generally it does mean it's more likely to be a recreational player. Also, if they're showing like a baby, like this guy is, it's a typical, fish basically. Again, obviously some rigs can do that, but it's more likely to be. And no offense to any of you if you do already do this, it's just I'm telling you guys, on average what does kind of give away like like hints towards what a regular is. Again, this is for 180 specifically. Like in cash, there's other things, but for 180 specifically, these things I've said so far. Also, one of the things I recommend also is to right click them and go find this player. And if you see how many tables he's playing, you get a pretty good idea. So if he's playing, say, this many tables, it's probably at least a semi-rig, so I'd be more likely to think that he can call a little bit wider and also be shoving a little bit wider. Whereas if you find someone, like I don't think I'll find someone at 2NL playing 25 tables, but if you see someone playing massive amounts of tables, that's almost always, again, like pretty much a rig. Again, if they're playing like, say, 6 tables or something, it's probably like a semi-rig, but not necessarily a rig, unless it's towards the end of the session or something. So yeah, if they're playing a lot of tables, it usually means that they're generally decent with their ranges. Once again, they can be one of the weaker rigs in the sense that their ranges aren't quite wide enough, but as a default, you can call them a bit wider if they're jamming and stuff. So at the same time, not only will the people watching the series know this, but also a lot of rigs in general probably have this idea. I mean, maybe not every single thing I said, but definitely some of it. And I guess that is one argument to turn off your VIP status if you are like Platinum or Supernova or whatever. And at the same time, like generally I would hide search feature unless you have a particular reason to show it. Sometimes people like to look up themselves to see like what kind of positions they are in each tournament or something, or maybe some people have backers or whatever that prefer them to leave it on, but generally like you're kind of giving away information. I would generally turn it off. I definitely would say, other than that, obviously much more important is if you actually have specific reads on players, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. Like taking notes, I think it's really important. So what we can do is we can use Holder Manager to do that. I personally don't really bother, but you can obviously. I'm not going to talk about how to take notes in Holder Manager or Poker Tracker today, but I will just show you how to do it in the main lobby of PokerStars, which I think is fine. So let's go to notes, and I'm not a degen, by the way. I'm just doing this, because it's hopefully entertaining a little bit at least, just randomly. So we can change these colors to like our liking. You can go, I think, edit, and you can change the color to anything. Basically, I think I maybe changed like a couple or whatever, but I don't think I did too many. You can basically, my point is, you can change these colors to your choosing, and yeah, when you do make a note, basically, you right click a player, go note, or sometimes if they've already left the table and you weren't quick enough to do it, you can also go to notes, and it should show every player that has been at the table so far or whatever, and you should be able to find them unless you forgot the username too, in which case you can obviously go replay and maybe hopefully try to find them. So yeah, I would basically, yeah, recommend to take notes. Like if you see basically anything that's noteworthy, I would take a note of. I would go to I would right click them, go note, and then write a note. Now I'm going to talk about what are the most important notes to take in the 180s in general. So firstly, for example, if I see someone that I don't know is already a regular and I don't already have a note in my mind about what kind of plays they're capable of, if I see someone jamming under the gun for 10 BBs, and also just in advance, I know that for some of you, mass multi-tabling is going to be an issue, or it means that it's less comfortable for you guys to take notes and stuff, and I know that some people in general just won't be able to play 30 tables and at the same time take notes, which is fine. But assuming that you are capable of taking notes, or if you're not playing that many tables and you can be taking notes, these are the kind of things that I would talk about. So, for instance, if I see a player jamming under the gun for 10 big blinds, I would, with no reads, I would generally be quite tight versus that range, because again, unless it's a regular, it's usually going to be a pretty tight range of, like, on average, maybe, again, versus an unknown, something like maybe, I don't know, pocket like 6s plus or 7s plus or something, ace jack suited, ace queen, or something like that. I mean, it could obviously be wider, but I mean, as an example, 10 big blinds with antes, it could be something like that. Now, that obviously is quite a tight range, and obviously a regular will be much wider than that. Like he'll be like, most aces, like every suited ace or something, like any pocket pair and so on. But my point is simply, you don't want to make a mistake of associating a non-reg as a reg or whatever. And what I would do is, if I see him jam, what I would do is I would take a note of if he shows up, whether I called him or whether someone else called him, I would take a note if it goes to showdown. And again, if you're playing a lot of tables, you might not be able to do this, but if you do, I would definitely take a note. So for instance, if it's noteworthy, that is. So for instance, if he shoves and he shows something like 6-5 suited, I would just say, like, jam. I would make it as quick as possible, something like jam Timby under the gun with antes 6-5 suited or something, or even better than that, like I would just write capable of jamming light, and I would also cover him. And, like, I mean, obviously this is pretty broad, but in my mind I would have a pretty good idea of exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I would take a note, something like this, and I would also label him accordingly to colors. Now, I haven't actually written specific labels for these, but you can basically excuse me, sorry, you can basically make specific labels for these colors. Now, I would do something along the lines of this, like, for instance, custom label 1 is like good rig, custom label 2 is like these colors aren't appropriate, by the way, but medium rig, or like, I don't know, meh rig or whatever, like something like that. Sorry, maybe I should just sit out in a second, but basically something yeah, I think I can just sit out. Oops. Medium rig or meh rig or whatever, like good rig, great rig, whatever, crushing rig, whatever you want to call it. Medium rig, and obviously you do want to know these notes for yourself. Medium rig, and for example break even or bad rig or whatever, like obviously you do want to have notes in your head about what these mean. Like for example, bad rig, like you know that he's not like completely retarded and spewy, so he's probably not really gonna, like, for example, post flop, like you don't want to like necessarily get 3 streets of value with like top pair, like horrible kicker or something like that. But in terms of his ranges, it probably just means he's quite tight or on the tighter side. That's an example. And obviously good rig just means that, for instance, his ranges will be pretty much like, not, I wouldn't say perfect, but basically like he's capable of doing everything correctly. Like he can shove under the gun with any 2 cards when he's really short. He can isolate correctly. He can also re-isolate rigs wide. Like for instance, if this hand happened kind of recently-ish, that I actually remember it actually, and I think it's something that, it's not one of the most important things. Like most of these things that I'm telling you guys in the series are the most important fundamental things, and they will get you like a good ROI and a good win rate. But if you want to get, like, I guess, a great win rate, some of the smaller things that you need to consider that most people, like, or most of the regulars don't really consider at the moment, is stuff like, if the button jams and it's a regular, and the small blind like isolates, and it's also like a very good regular, you know that the small blind is very often going to be very, very light here, because he knows that the button is going to be very wide also. So obviously this does depend on the sorry, not the blind level, the blind structure, sorry, the blind level, and how many big blinds and stuff it is. But in general, the button will be very light with 10 big blinds, for instance, close to any two cards. I mean, if he knows that you're both regulars in the blinds, then not any two, but very wide. Or like, for instance, if it's a guy you know who's a regular but who probably doesn't recognize you, then it means that he's very likely to shove any two just because he thinks you're random. So let's say, yeah, the button shoves and the small blind isolates or calls or whatever. And if it's a really good rig, his range will be as wide as any ace. This is the small blind, right? So therefore, you can even call, like, for example, ace 8 or ace 9 or whatever. And usually I would pretty happily fold these. But in these spots, once you become more familiar with like exactly who's playing and stuff, you can kind of make these like thinner but profitable calls and stuff. But anyway, that's for some of the example notes I have. Like, also, I'd like to have like a general one, which I don't really label anything. I just have like whatever, full stop, whatever, and that's where I can make notes that don't necessarily define a player as weak, good, or bad, or whatever. But for instance, if I see some guy like as an example only, I guess this would make him pretty bad in the 180s, because I think it's really bad in general, and it shouldn't be done in the 180s. But for instance, if I see a guy check raise the flop with complete air, then barrel the turn and then bluff shove the river with air, then that's pretty damn spewy in the 180s, and I would take a note like basically what he did, right? And I wouldn't necessarily label him as a fish or a rig or whatever, but I would just say spewy or whatever, and write down like the line he took or whatever, and I would just label it under general. Or for instance, if I see like some guy who, for example, limp folds blind versus blind, it's not necessarily a fish. Like, some rigs do that and it's fine, so I could just again put that under like a general note, like full stop or whatever. And yeah, I mean, other than that, you generally want to have maybe a color like green is usually quite common, like for like a fish, and you can again label a fish or whatever. So yeah, I mean, you can also, one of the most common things that you want to make a note for is like limp fold. And if excuse me, if you don't really want to like type that down every time, maybe it helps if you have like a color that's just for limp fold. And that's what one of my friends has told me recently that he does. I don't know if I do it, because I can usually multi-table okay, so it's probably not a big of an issue. But you can write, sorry, not limp folding, but limp fold, and every time if you do see a limp fold and you don't have time to make a note, you can just simply click purple, and now here's the limp folder. You kind of have to remember this in your mind. So I didn't save it, but it will show up as, like, instead of custom label 6, like limp fold or limp folder or whatever. Now let's talk about what actual notes we should take. Like, if I see someone limp fold, I would write very comfortably like limp fold. The stages matter, so I would usually write like TX for the big blind. So for instance, if he if he limp folds for like when the blinds are 100, 200, I would write something like limp fold T200 with 10 BB stack, depending on the stack size, obviously. And maybe sometimes if it's like under the gun or blind versus blind, I'd take a note of that as well. So for instance, if I see some guy limp under the blind with a 2k stack, under the gun with a 2k stack, and the blinds are 100, 200, then I would take a note something like this. Basically exactly limp fold T200, 10 BB stack, 10 BB under the gun. I would make it as short as possible so you can actually have the time to type it. And you can obviously also make it longer or shorter. Like, you can even write L/F, or you can write like limp fold. Like, I wouldn't write under the gun, but under the gun 10 big blind. Like, probably I wouldn't even do that. Like 10 BB stack basically is fine. Not much else to say. T200 or like BB200 is fine. Or 100, 200 if you really want to. And of course, if the blinds are like 1000, 2000 as well, you can write like T2000. And if you want to write something like with ante, if you're not really familiar enough, but you get an idea. You don't really need to know these things, as in you don't need to know exactly how much the ante is and stuff like that. You just want to have a good idea about the fact that he limp folded previously. Similarly, if you've seen him like limp call, actually no, firstly I'll just talk about why that's important. Because simply, when someone limp folds and you've seen them do it before, if they limp again, it means that on average they're more likely to be limp folding this time, and you know that they're capable of limp folding. Therefore, you can jam a wider range because you have more fold equity versus this player than a complete random. Now obviously, just keep in mind that like if you have shoved on his limp before and you thought like another time and another time, not because you're going crazy at him, just because you've picked up enough hands. Like maybe you had like ace 10 like 3 times in a row, which are pretty standard jamming hands depending on the positions. Maybe the third time, if you pick up something at the bottom of your range, fold it because he's tired of getting picked on. He might be trapping now, but generally it's not a big deal, but I just thought I'd point that out anyway. Take these notes, and if you do see that this guy has such a note, then you know what adjustments to make. You know that he's limp folding previously, so of course he won't limp fold every time necessarily, but it's more likely he will, and you can jam wider versus him. Now, similarly, if you see someone limp call, you do want to take a note. Like if someone limps aces, take a note. Like limp AA. Sometimes if you don't have enough time, just write limp AA. That's fine. You have a pretty good idea. Next time they limp, it's more likely to be a monster than like an average player. Or if you have specific, like if you have time to write, write something like limp AA, 10 BBs under the gun, or whatever, or KK kings, anything basically, anything you see them turn up with, take a note. Like if it's aces and kings, you can just write limp AA or any positions in the stack size if you want. But if it's like a really weird hand or bad hand or whatever, take a note, because AA obviously they called. But for instance, if some guy limps under the gun and then he calls a shove with like, I don't know, anything basically, queen 2 offsuit, I take a note, like limp / called queen 2 offsuit under the gun 10 BBs or whatever, and like maybe the blind level or whatever, or like sometimes it's obviously it's not going to be like that crap of a hand, but sometimes it can be ace 2 suited, ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, like ace king, like they limp anything really, so that's something to keep in mind. Similarly, we want to take notes when people, again, if we do see them like do things that we thought that we didn't know before, we can take a note, such as like capable of jamming light or whatever. Like again, this is really general, but you have a good idea. Next time you see him jam on the cutoff for 10 big blinds, he's gonna be wide. He's gonna be any pocket pair, any ace probably, any Broadway and so on, and suited connectors and weaker. I don't know, basically very wide compared to the average player. Now, what else can we take notes of? Like, for instance, blind versus blind. If we shove 10 big blinds when there are antes versus like a regular, or even more, 11, 12, like if we know he's a regular, unless we're pretty sure he doesn't know us, which is fine. Which means that we can push a bit lighter because he's less likely to suspect we're regular also. Like, for instance, if I'm shoving into someone who knows me, for example, I don't know if you guys know, but it's just a random example only, but like, let's say, one of the regulars, White Rabbito, or whatever, like, I'm not gonna name names, I guess, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but if I do that, I know he knows I'm a regular, so it would be a pretty big mistake for me to jam, like, say, 3-2 offsuit. Well, not a big mistake, because, with those stack sizes, it can't be too bad, but he's gonna call me probably with any king, a lot of queens, like 10-9 suited and stuff like that, and I'm gonna have less fold equity, and he's gonna call more often, so it would be worse to shove so wide versus him. Now, if instead I was jamming into a regular who probably didn't recognize me, or if one of you guys jammed into, say, White Rabbit, he probably, or possibly, depending on who you are, won't know that you're regular, so he won't necessarily call as wide. But my point is, whilst the reg will call wider than randoms on average, they won't call so wide unless they know your reg who's jamming into or close to. So whilst the regular on average will still call lighter, in specific examples such as 8 big blinds, blind versus blind, with antes, I'd still jam into, just because even if they did know I was a reg, they probably aren't necessarily calling correctly, but especially if they didn't know, and again, many of you who haven't logged in many games yet and stuff like that, once you move up and you do see people who you recognize as regulars, when you jam any 2 on them, they probably won't necessarily know that you're regular, and whilst they'll call wider than like a normal player, they still won't, call quite as wide as they would versus someone who they know are shoving any 2 cards. And anyway, my point is basically, if you do see this happen, if you do make such a shove and you see them call you, if they make a light call, take a note. Like, say, for example, either calls light, again, a general note is calls light, which is fine, and as soon as you see that next time, you can, obviously not jam as wide, or you can specifically say called BVB, 10BB, with antes, king 2 off, or 10-9 suited, I don't know, other light hands, I guess, like, I don't know, anything really, like queen 7 suited, queen 5 suited, whatever, like, anything they call with that is like a surprise, like in inverted commas, obviously. Take a note, like, obviously if they call you with aces, don't write, oh, they called aces, it's a pointless note. Similarly, if you see someone shove under the gun with 10 big blinds and they had ace jack, ace 10 or whatever, like, just don't take a note because it's pointless. It's something that's so standard that there's no, it's not noteworthy, right? But if they jammed under the gun with 5-6 suited, 7-6 suited, 10 jack off or whatever, you can take a note that they jammed light or the specific hand they jammed. And once again, if you do see these kind of notes, then you want to adjust like accordingly to the note. Like the adjustments are pretty obvious. If they call light blind versus blind, or they call light in general, you want to adjust your ranges to be a little bit tighter. Similarly, if you simply just see a few colors, like for instance, let's say we label. Let's say we label. I want to get rid of these notes because I don't want to have random notes on people. But let's say, sorry for now anyway, but let's say we have a note that is like red is like good rig. Now let's say we have this, we go okay. Okay, so save this good rig. Now let's say we're playing 180. Now obviously it's hard to imagine, we're not even on the table anymore because we got kicked out, but let's say that's a good rig. This is a good rig. Now if I'm on the button here and I'm in a default spot where I would shove any two, if I see these two guys behind me and they're both good rigs, obviously I'm going to jam tighter now, right? Because they're going to call lighter. Similarly, let's say I labeled this guy to be like I didn't even take a note. Let's say like green is fish, right? But I didn't. Let's say I'm not putting him on a fish. I'm just putting a general note, and I say called really wide. Like he's not even regular, but for some reason maybe he called really wide because he's really loose or likes to gamble or whatever. Then at the same time, it's the same thing. Like he's not a regular, but he's also calling wider. So again, I'm shoving tighter. So that's just some general things. Similarly, if a guy with like red around, which means good rig, jams blind versus me, I'm going to call much lighter than I would versus a random. And once again, we can do these things such as look at their HUD stats, look at their avatar maybe sometimes, but more importantly, just find this player. Look, this guy's a rig, add to it now, but he's a rig. He's going to be shoving wider than the average player, or he's showing supernova. He's more likely to be shoving. And similarly, if you want to, you can look them up on like SharkScope or official poker rankings or something like that. I'm not 100% sure regarding the actual rules about this, so maybe if you want to, it's maybe better to do it after a session, but obviously you can, basically you can do it after a session and then take a note on them, or you can do it in game. I mean, I don't really know, but yeah, you can you can look up and see what the winnings are like. If it's good, it's more likely a regular, obviously. Like, depending on how good, it can obviously be definitely a regular. Like if you see some guy who's played like 20k sets with like a linear graph, obviously it's going to be a regular, but that's just another example. Now finally, I just want to talk about the HUD. I know most of you will be pretty sus with this, but I just want to quickly talk, like sus as in sorted, sorry, with this. Now basically the most important thing, like for MTTs or like, well, especially like 180s, like ignore that last comment. Let's just say for for 180s, I would say these are the only three stats you really need. Like there are a few you can use, and I'll talk about that quickly, but basically you definitely need VPIP, and you can obviously like make it so that there's a note like which says VPIP or VE or VP or whatever. I don't have any notes, like I don't have any abbreviations, but that's just me. You can make it whatever color you want as well, but basically for the 180s, all you need is VPIP and PFR, in my opinion. That's all I use, especially when I'm 30 tabling. That's all I look at, pretty much. Like sometimes you can click up the pop-up and you can kind of see like, okay, I guess it's because I'm not sitting down. Okay, I guess I need to sit down. Oh man, all of the people taking my action. Oh, solid bum hunters. Oh, what the hell? Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so I sat down. It might take like a second before the HUD loads, but basically, you can see some of the other stats, like specifically, like if you click out, you can see the pop-up, and sometimes I use those, but generally, VPIP, PFR, and what was the last one? The number of hands is all you need. Yeah, so basically VPIP, number of hands they voluntarily enter the pot with, and PFR, number of hands they raise pre-flop, and number of hands is all I need. Hands is just the sample size, which is important because you want to make sure that if you're looking at these stats that the sample size is relevant. So for example, if it's 10 hands, unless maybe he's playing like 100 or something like that, it doesn't really mean much. Like if he's 15/12 over 10 hands, it doesn't mean he's tight necessarily, right? It's just 10 hands. Whereas if it's like 300 hands and he's playing like 6/5, he's a nit. So that's basically all you really need. Like I don't use these HUD stats that often, and quite frankly, I think I could probably play without them. But yeah, it just gives you like an idea, basically, mostly for if one guy is extremely loose or extremely tight. Usually, like of course you can kind of get a general idea in between, but you can also just kind of see like if a guy is for example 6/5 over a big sample, or like 50/20 over a big sample, you can get an idea of like how bad he is or whatever. And also like this is actually something that's quite important that I kind of like, not realized, but I guess I didn't really think about this before. I don't know, recently. It's just simply like if a guy is playing like say 13/2, this is actually sorry 13 slash 10 or 12 or whatever. Whilst that seems quite tight, it's actually like really typical for like for pretty much all of the regulars. And the reason for that is basically because if you think about it, like most of the hands you're gonna get on a person, like if I have 600 hands on a particular regular, most of those hands, or a pretty big percentage of those hands, are gonna be on the early stages at 10, 20, 15, 30 and so on. And during these stages, the players will be playing, the regulars will be playing really tight, and you should be, and I would too. Similarly, my HUD stats, over on any regulars sample size should also look the same for the 180s as well. So if you see some guys and his stats is like 13/12 or like 10/9 or 11/10 or whatever over a decent sample, and it's like the late game and he shoves, honestly, I don't interpret this as some guy who's tight and more likely to shove tighter. I actually just simply look at that and go, oh, okay, it's probably a regular, therefore he's probably wider. I mean, of course, sometimes you can see like really nitty players have stats like that. Like usually if they have stats like this, specifically 11/10 or whatever, it's more likely to be a regular rather than like just some random tight fish, because usually the gap between the VPIP and the PFR will be much bigger if it's like a tight fish. So for instance, it could be like 10/2 or like 11/5 or something, whereas if it's a regular, it'll be kind of closer. Of course, my point is basically just, again, instead of looking at these stats as tight, which they kind of look like they are, it just means it's more like an indication that they're regular for me if I don't already have a note that they are. And again, for instance, maybe some full ring cash player randomly one day decided to play some 180 sits and he's just much tighter than he should be. Of course, sometimes when you look at these stats and you think, oh, it's a regular, it could be wrong in the sense that he's not necessarily wide, but it definitely does, on average, it's better to interpret this as he's a regular and therefore he's more likely to be shoving wide than he looks quite tight. And yeah, I mean, once again, if you haven't really thought about this, think about it. Like, if you do look at the typical regular stats in the 180s, it should be something like on the lower side, because after all, it is full ring at the start, and it is 10, 20, 15, 30. Like, honestly, your stats should be pretty tight. So yeah, that was just something I thought I'd point out. So I think that's pretty much like all I had to say for today. Like, if you guys again have any questions at all or anything that you want to suggest, like even if you're not sure, if you just want to suggest something that we could talk about in future episodes, I'd be happy to like consider it at least, and probably even do it. Once again, I do have other things I have planned, but if you guys do have something to suggest, please do so. I'd be happy to again consider and put it up. Other than that, yeah, I mean, of course, if you have any questions about this video or any comments or anything you disagree with or would like to add for other people's benefit, feel free to do so. Hey guys, I'm just going to quickly ninja this video and talk about a few more things before I actually finish it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the HUD stats that I mentioned, which I didn't actually talk about. So the other HUD stats that you can consider using, which I said other than PFR, VPIP, and hands or sample size, is firstly, it's not really a stat, but you can use name, and this basically literally just writes the name of the person who the HUD stats are for. And the reason this is just something that you could possibly think about is just to make sure that each of the HUD stats are for the correct player, so you don't make incorrect adjustments or incorrect plays based on information that's basically incorrect. The HUDs usually are pretty good, but occasionally they do screw up a little bit, and to be safe, this is something you can definitely consider. Secondly, steal and falter steal. Steal is when someone opens on either the cutoff, the button, or the small blind in an unopened pot. Now, the reason you'd want to see someone's steal percentage is obviously so you can kind of adjust to what kind of range they're shoving or even stealing with, so you can know what kind of range you can reshove with. Generally, I don't actually use this stat, but it's definitely helpful for making a close decision, leaning towards either a shove or a fold, or a reshove or a fold. Now, what I mean by that is, for instance, if say the cutoff opens for whatever amount with whatever stack, and you have ace 10, and for whatever particular reason, with the exact stack size in this exact situation, it's really close, and you're not sure what to do exactly with ace 10. For instance, ace jack, you're pretty sure it's a jam, and ace 10 is basically on the borderline. Then if the guy has a pretty high steal stat, then you can lean towards a shove. If the guy has a low steal stat, you can lean towards a fold, and that's if it's close. Now, I just want to caution you guys that with the stat, as well as Folder Steel, the sample size is often going to take quite a while to actually be significant, and the reason for that is because even if you play a decent number of hands with someone, the number of situations where they're going to be able to steal isn't that high, because, for instance, someone might open under the gun first before them, or their hand just might not be that good, and it does take a little while for the sample to converge. But at the same time, like I said, I wouldn't really use it too seriously anyway, so it's more of a stat that you can use to help you lean towards a decision if it's close. Similarly with fold to steal, if a spot is kind of close in terms of whether you should be shoving or folding, then again you can use the stat. If they have a high fold to steal percentage, then it's gonna make you lean towards a shove, and obviously if they have a low steal to fold, fold to steal percentage, then you can lean towards a fold. Now it does, again, it's the same thing in the sense that their fold to steal is basically the number of times they folded their small blind or big blind to either a cutoff button or small blind raise. So once again, I said you can kind of use these stats to help you lean towards a decision when it's close. Other than that, you can also use things like aggression factor, which basically just gives you roughly an idea of how often someone is betting or raising as opposed to calling. And this, again, it's not really something I use, but it does give you a pretty good idea, or an okay idea about how aggro a player is, and particularly it's kind of useful versus fish, because it gives you a better idea of if they're kind of an aggro fish or passive fish. So usually if this number is quite high, it does mean that they're kind of betting and raising more often, and therefore they're more likely to be raising their top pairs rather than just calling with them, versus more passive fish with really low aggression frequencies. Then they probably just check call with like king queen on a queen 2-2 board, for example, whereas the aggro fish will probably raise this and sometimes some bluffs such as flush draws and stuff, which the passive fish will also more often just call. So again, it's not something I really use personally, but it's something you can definitely consider using, because it does make some decisions post flop, especially in the earlier games sorry, the earlier stages, easier to lean towards like a get it in or not. For instance, if you have like I don't know, for example, like, even king queen on that board, if the guy has a really high aggression frequency or factor over like a decent sample size, then it's more likely that he's raising, flush draws, weaker queens and stuff, whereas if the guy has a really low aggression frequency or factor, then it does tend to mean that they're pretty nutted when they do raise, because they usually just call their draws, usually just call their weaker top pairs and stuff like that. Other than that, 3-bet is something that you can kind of use as well. It does just give you an idea of how often someone is 3-betting. Again, I don't expect this number to be too high often, because it will include hands from the earlier stages, but it does give you an idea. Again, I would usually use the stat to get a better idea of reshoving, but again, this is kind of a problem, and it's the same with steal and fold to steal, that even for the regulars, when you look at the stat, it's often going to be quite weighted towards hands from the earlier stages and blind levels, like 10, 20, and 15, 30, because that's where you'll probably get more hands on rigs and other players. And like I said, during these stages, obviously people are playing differently to the later stages, where you will often, where these stats will be more important anyway. So again, I would caution you for taking these stats too seriously or whatever, but it definitely is something you can consider using. Other than that, there's not really that many others that I would consider. Like I said, I don't even use most of these, but you can also there's a stat for like limp fold, which can be quite useful for obvious reasons. Like if a guy has a high limp fold, even if it's over a small sample size, you do know that he's generally going to be folding more often to a shove if he does limp. And again, this obviously can be somewhat misleading in the sense that someone might limp fold at 10-20 because they wanted to set mine with like a pocket pair, and then someone made a pretty big raise, and then the raise was too big and they had to fold or something. And you don't really want to see some guy folding one out of one for limp folding, and then based on that you just shove much lighter than you normally would, because again, the example I gave could be pretty relevant, and that could even be a regular. Some of the regulars will limp pocket pairs in the early stages and then fold to a big raise, obviously. So yeah, it's something that you can definitely use to help you lean towards a decision in a close spot, but don't use it too seriously. And again, it's definitely a sample size thing, because you usually won't get a big number on this. Like even 5 is pretty rare, I think, in general. So I'm just gonna talk about the VIP thing on PokerStars. I'm not gonna talk about it for too long, but basically, in these games, actually no, I'll just say this, like on PokerStars, as most of you should know, you don't get any like rake back in the sense that you don't get direct cash, but instead you get bonuses and like free rolls and things like that. And for the smaller VIP levels like Bronze Star and Silver Star, I'm pretty sure there are some free rolls which you can have a look around for. But in particular, there's for Silver Star and higher, for Gold Star and higher, I believe at the end of every month there's like a $10 free roll. Sorry, there's a free roll tournament if you're Gold Star or higher, which you can play for free, and the equity that you have is roughly $10. So if you're playing during this time anyway, I believe it's either Saturday or Sunday, the last of every month or something. I would definitely recommend playing it for obvious reasons because it's a free roll, so it's $10 of equity for free. I don't know the exact date and stuff, but you can look it up. You should be able to find it relatively easy, or find it on PokerStars main site. It's just something that if you don't already know about, it's again $10 of free equity, and it's an equivalent of rakeback. As well as that, you of course get your FPPs, and how you use them will determine what kind of percentage approximately you're actually getting for your rake back. So, for instance, if you're buying the cash bonuses, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but the lower ones like Bronze Star, Silver Star, Gold Star, and probably even Platinum Star, they give a pretty bad return in the sense that, for instance, Bronze Star, the VIP reward is like $25, and you spend 2,500 FPPs on that. Now you're getting 1 cent per FPP. Compare that to like Supernova's $250,000 250,000 FPP bonus, where you're getting 4,000 for that, and the rate is like 1.6. So it's obviously pretty easily you can do the math, and it's 1.6 times better, and that's pretty significant. Like it can make a difference between getting like say 25% rakeback equivalent to like say 35% or whatever, and that's again it's somewhat significant, and it's worth thinking about anyway. Now, generally, I wouldn't recommend using these cash bonuses unless you're Supernova. However, obviously, the other alternatives do have their downsides, and I'll talk about those shortly. But basically, they either use time or they have some variance involved, whereas these are obviously guaranteed and they don't take any time. So, you can kind of do some homework yourself and find out what kind of rates each one gives, and then think about what's best for you. But other than of course the VIP, like the stuff in the stores which you can buy, there's also the online tournament tickets, which give a pretty good rate. I believe they usually give 1.57, and I think they get a bit better as you go up. Now, obviously, I don't expect you guys to be using these higher stake ones on average. Like most of you probably won't be, and that's fine. But for instance, like the $11 Sunday Storm, if you're playing this anyway and you're an MTT player, or sometimes you play MTTs on the side, then the rate you get for 700 FPP for $11 is something like, I think it's 1.57 as well, so it's almost as good as the Supernova bonus. So if you are playing this anyway, then you may as well use your FPP to get a better rakeback equivalent percentage than using the cash to play it. And similarly, any of the other tournaments, of course, you can do the same, like the big 33, the big 22, and so on, and maybe even like the $109 tournaments, or like the Sunday Million or whatever, if you do play those things. Now, I'm not going to talk about the other stuff in the VIP store, but I will talk about the satellites. Now, I believe they have, there's various satellites and stuff, and they usually give pretty good rates. Now, obviously, these do involve variance, and you do have to spend a little bit of time on them. Now, the most commonly the most well-known one, I guess, is the 235 FPP Hyper. Now, the rest of them you can obviously play as well, but I won't really talk about them. They give pretty good rates and stuff, but this is usually pretty good because it's a good amount. They run very often. They don't take long. Whereas, for instance, the higher ones, they don't run often, and also they're obviously pretty high variance as well, in the sense that, like, the number is higher, so the variance isn't necessarily higher. But if you're playing, like, say, with 2,700 FPP in one game, then obviously it's going to be more higher variance in an absolute sense than if you're playing, like, say, 10 smaller ones with the same format. And similarly, or like another factor to consider is obviously the higher ones generally on average will be a little bit tougher, and that's important in the sense that in order to get the good rates, like 1.57, which is what the average person will get, you have to run like average or play and have basically an effective ROI of exactly 0. Now, I think that's very possible for anyone who can beat, like, say, the 180s. Your ranges for the hypers won't necessarily be perfect, but you should be able to, like, have a generally good idea of roughly what kind of ranges you can be going with, and subsequently it does mean that you should generally be able to pretty easily break even at the 235 level. Now, even if you are, like, I don't know, quote unquote, like, well, like in inverted commas, like not very good, then at worst you should be like -2% or something like that, in which case you're still getting a really good rate, and instead of 1.57 you might be getting like 1.5 or something, which is still much better than, for instance, the bronze star bonus or the silver star bonus or whatever. So I would still recommend playing them, and of course you can get better and so on. And similarly, if you are remotely decent, you can probably even get a little bit better, and you can get like 1 or 2% ROI or something, because whilst there are regulars who play these, there are a lot of random people who are just using their points on them, who don't really have a good idea about ranges. I'm not really going to talk about the strategy of these, but basically you spend 235 FPP, and the first two places get an entry to the Sunday Storm, and the Sunday Storm is $11. Now, when you do actually get into the Sunday Storm, you can unregister it and get the $11 tournament money instead. Now, since you guys are playing 180s, you can use that tournament money to play the 180s, so basically it's literally cash. If you for some reason have you played and now you don't want to play any MTTs including 180s for a while, then you can sell the tournament money for basically like 99% plus on 2+2 pretty easily. I'm not really going to show you the thread or whatever, but it's pretty easy to find. But yeah, it gives you a very good rate. They're pretty quick, but there's of course some variance. But generally, each one is roughly like 2.35. That's something like $3 worth of a buy-in. And unless you're maybe only playing the 250s and stuff, it's generally not too big of a deal to basically play these, because the extra expected value in terms of the better return you're getting is going to be worth it's going to be worth the variance and the time for most people. Again, it's up to you, and you can kind of think about this for yourself. So yeah, I thought I would just quickly mention this, because obviously your hourly and overall your profit and the money that you make is going to be somewhat affected by rakeback. If you're getting, for instance, 20% equivalent or 30% equivalent, that does, at the end of the day, after like a big enough sample, it does add up to hundreds and even thousands. So yeah, I would definitely consider that. And that's pretty much it. So I'd just like to thank you guys again for watching. Once again, feel free to ask me any questions, leave any comments. I'm always happy to see when people have told me that the videos have helped them a lot, or even if people have any complaints or suggestions, or basically just any disagreements at all. I'm really happy if you post it, because of course if I have made a mistake, it's much better if you do say so, and then everyone can see and we can discuss it, and perhaps maybe I'll disagree with you, and that's fine. I'll never be rude to you or something like that. I'll tell you, why I disagree or whatever. So yeah, again, thanks for watching, and see you guys again soon.